for the secret sauce, 5 simple tips for digitizing lettering. As simple as it might seem, lettering can cause a lot of consternation for digitizers when they first start their craft. Though most software packages bundle in a host of fonts or have many available for purchase, commercial embroidery, especially business to business, means you're going to be recreating custom logo types and you're going to have to draw letter shapes from objects yourself. Nothing looks worse than a logo that looks like a knockoff because you've used a close enough font. Moreover, even when you have a stock typeface that you know of with an open type font in hand, allowing for automatic auto digitizing conversions sometimes means that the lettering comes out strange or has different quality issues or substandard stitch quality. As such, if we want to ensure fidelity, we're often going to digitize ourselves. But with that in mind, let's go ahead and talk about 5 things we can do to kind of keep our digitizing looking its best and trying to certainly make it look the way it should look for all of us. So, with these 5 simple tips, the first one is we should really keep scale in mind. Now, apparently, still having some difficulties here, but that's fine. Suffice it to say, we keep scale in mind. We should really think about the fact that the thinnest satin stitch made with 40 weight thread that we can rely upon is generally about 1 millimeter wide. This is 40 weight thread, the standard for embroidery, 7511 needles. The thinnest gap between satins or a loop encircled by satins must be around 8.8 to 1 millimeter in width to remain open and clear. It means that the smallest reliable letter for most materials is going to be about 5 millimeters tall. And honestly, this is what it looks like. We have a stack. If you look like a letter E, its stack of 5 rows of satins and gaps will give us this kind of setup without alteration. Envision those horizontal strokes in the letter E, and you'll see we have a satin, a gap, a satin, a gap, and a satin. We know that that is going to give us that 5 millimeters, and that's fairly standard. So, when we're dealing with this, you can sometimes do things with like 60 weight threads. Thinner threads can help. 60 weight threads, a 65.9 needle, it's going to give you about 25% smaller text. It's not going to remove this problem entirely, and that is only where garment texture allows. Just remember to increase density where needed, and certainly that you want to think about the physicality of the thread when we're starting to make these plans. All right. Secondarily, we want to think in strokes. If you find yourself having difficulty kind of deciding where to split letters about or how to overlap strokes, certainly one of the best things we can do is think of it kind of calligraphically. A calligraphy pen, when you're drawing calligraphy, maybe watch some calligraphy videos, you'll see that people take one stroke at a time and draw letters individually. Well, when we do that, we can break up those satin stitches in a similar way with most letters. If you think of your satin stitch as a wide pen, which is similar to what it is when we draw these things with these straight lines that are stitches, it can help us to kind of understand the way things are constructed. And as we see, even with standard lettering, you can have very similar shapes as we see in the strokes in calligraphy. Here we're separating these strokes. You'll often compromise efficiency sometimes where you have to get things to layer just right, but thinking calligraphically like this in strokes can help you figure out where you're going to break letters apart. Third, we want to analyze overlaps. Now, honestly, this is something where sometimes it is a choice that can be artistic, but we have a lot of difficulty choosing where two satin strokes come together in a corner or a junction. Knowing the kinds of junctions you can create and their qualities can help with the best decisions. For small lettering, a cap can be created. A new single satin stitch object covers the area where two strokes come together. It's great for reducing excess density, but for really large lettering, sometimes the stitches can get too long when we cover both strokes with that one satin stitch. An overlap corner, instead, where we overlap both strokes entirely, can be better for those larger letters, but we can sometimes see on small letters it builds up excess density. And then there's a mitered corner where you have two narrowing satin stitches going over the top of each other, and those create a sharper point, but sometimes we get excess density or we get very small stitches when lettering is too small. So we really need to think about the fact that these things differ and can change the way that we have that look. So junctions, capped and lapped, can be different for different sizes. We can see that those lapped junctions get too large sometimes, the full overlaps and the full caps, and sometimes we can have that excess density buildup. And with mitering, you'll see that sometimes at small sizes, you get really small points as we miter out into those corners. So think about the size, the scale again, and what we have to do with density to make this work. Next, we have selecting the right serifs. Serifs can either be integral, part of the individual stroke, or separated from the strokes. When they're simply a part of the stroke brought to a flared end, a fine line serif can be achieved, but with large text, those stitches can become overly long and sometimes can even be filtered out by your machine or run incredibly slow, even if they aren't. With larger text, a satin with the same column where we don't split and turn that satin off to the side for as its own object can be much too long in that larger satin stitches. Remember, though, as we go smaller, we need to have that about millimeter column to make a satin stitch run. So we know that can also be an issue. But as I said previously, if you look at a large continuous column as we have in this existence here, you see how we get these dotted lines at the bottom. It turns out that when we get too large, this is too long for your machine to stitch and they will be filtered out. Instead, you want something like we have in this other block on the side with this separated satin stitch column when we get out to those larger sizes. Continuous serifs like this on the left, great for really small text. Just make sure you're watching your distortion. Once again, just we have to think about the physicality of what this is. And last but not least, we want to deal with distortion. Being very clean edged and geometric typefaces overly show the natural distortion present in embroidery. Push distortion makes columns get longer, taller. We have a vertical column here. It's always going to get taller. And pull distortion is always going to make that satin column get narrower. So it means not only do we have to compensate to make individual letters stitch correctly, but our compensation has to account for these disparate forces so the lettering can kind of meet in the middle at the proper baseline or vertical lines. It's something you've seen me talk about before if you've ever seen me talk about embroidery, because it's the top problem people have in making their embroidery look the way they want it to. Not understanding these stitches are intention. Also, when you have round letters like O's, G's, and S's, even in a true type font in print, they're always a little taller and drop a little below the baseline with lettering for optical balance because our eyes see those rounded edges dropping away as something that's shorter. Unfortunately, this is just something we have to deal with. And the reality is, if you want lettering to look nice and clean with a top and bottom line like you see in the top of the stitching, on screen it's going to have to look very tall and narrow and strange and wide and not the right shapes because the distortion is natural in the embroidery and that is constantly going to happen. The screen is lying to you. If you want perfection on the machine, you have to have the proper kind of distortion on screen. And as I said previously, it is all about managing that push and pull compensation and understanding stitches under tension are always going to get narrower and they're always going to push out toward those open ends. Now, certainly, this is not all that you have to do to get your lettering stitched correctly. This is not all there is to interpreting lettering. However, these foundational examples of how to create satin stitch lettering paired with some of observation of existing lettering in some well-made keyboard fonts can really help you take on custom type with quite a bit more confidence. Get out there, grab your favorite logo, do something as a self-directed project, and try this out. But most importantly, remember, the produce of the digitizer is not the file, it's the embroidery. Get it on the machine. And that is my secret sauce.